After midnight on December 27, 1966, Spencer Matteson lay sleeping next to a sandbag pit on LZ Bird, a low-lying hilltop firebase near Thon Xuan Son in Binh Dinh Province. The hilltop was about the size of a football field, ringed with artillery positions, 105mm and 150mm howitzers spaced irregularly across the plateau. A 500-gallon bladder of jet fuel sat exposed near the helicopter pad. Matteson, a member of the weapons platoon, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 12th Cavalry, 1st Cavalry Division, had 170 American soldiers for company that night. What he didn't know was that out in the darkness beyond the perimeter, 2 battalions of the NVA's 22nd Regiment, nearly 1,000 well-trained, disciplined soldiers reinforced by local Viet Cong, were slithering through elephant grass with uncanny stealth. Many of the Americans felt they were being used as bait. The position was strategically questionable, vulnerable to rocket and mortar fire from higher ridges nearby. At 1 a.m., a thunderous roar of incoming fire blew Matteson from his sleep. Within seconds, his 2 bunker mates were wounded and bleeding. His M60 machine gun jammed after a few bursts, leaving him with just a .45 pistol. Sergeant Delbert Jennings began hurling grenades as fast as Matteson and others could unwrap them. By dawn, the firebase had been overrun except for one small foothold. 26 men from Matteson's platoon went into the fight, only 6 emerged without a scratch. The body count would read 58 American dead, 71 wounded. Looked like a defeat. But this was search and destroy warfare, and by its own metrics, LZ Bird was a success. American forces claimed over 200 enemy dead. The firebase was retaken. Mission accomplished. Except the enemy melted back into the jungle, refilled their ranks, and prepared to do it all again. This was the paradox at the heart of America's Vietnam strategy. You could win every battle and still lose the war. When General William Westmoreland assumed command of Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, MACV, in 1964, he brought with him the confident doctrine that had won World War II and held the line in Korea. Attrition warfare executed with overwhelming firepower and mobility. Search and destroy operations were his answer to fighting an elusive enemy in unfamiliar terrain. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. Use intelligence to locate enemy concentrations, insert forces rapidly by helicopter, engage and destroy the enemy with superior firepower, then extract before the enemy could mass for a counterattack. We'll just go on bleeding them until Hanoi wakes up to the fact that they have bled their country to the point of national disaster for generations, Westmoreland told reporters in 1966. The metrics seemed irrefutable. American forces possessed helicopter mobility that could put troops anywhere within hours, artillery that could deliver devastating fire support, and air power that could level square miles of jungle. The enemy had none of these advantages. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara embraced search and destroy with technocratic enthusiasm, confident that quantifiable metrics would demonstrate progress. Body count became the primary measure of success, a cold calculus that assumed killing enough enemy soldiers would break Hanoi's will to fight. McNamara's systems analysts projected that if American forces could maintain a kill ratio of 10:1, the war would be won within 2 years. On paper, it made perfect sense. Pentagon strategists drew direct comparisons to the island-hopping campaigns of World War II and the set-piece battles of Korea. American commanders had decades of experience in conventional warfare, where capturing and holding terrain led to victory. They believed the same principles would apply in Vietnam, adapted for jungle warfare and enhanced by superior technology. The fact that their enemy fought by completely different rules, avoiding decisive battles, refusing to hold territory, viewing casualties as acceptable costs for political objectives, didn't fully register in initial planning. Junior officers fresh from West Point and Fort Benning arrived in Vietnam expecting to apply their textbook training. Many assumed Vietnamese fighters would behave like the Germans or Japanese. Fight for positions, defend key terrain, break when casualties mounted. The early operations in 1965 seemed to validate this confidence. American units routinely inflicted heavy casualties while taking relatively light losses themselves. Commanders filed reports brimming with optimism. Search and destroy was working exactly as designed. The genesis of search and destroy tactics emerged from President Kennedy's commitment to counterinsurgency warfare. But it was President Johnson's escalation in 1965 that gave Westmoreland the forces to implement the strategy at scale. By late 1965, American troop levels exceeded 180,000 and continued climbing. Westmoreland divided South Vietnam into tactical zones and committed to aggressive offensive operations aimed at finding and fixing enemy forces for destruction. The operational framework relied on three elements: intelligence gathering to locate enemy units, rapid helicopter insertion to establish blocking positions or landing zones, and massed firepower to annihilate enemy forces before they could escape. Fire bases like Ellsberg served as forward artillery platforms and helicopter staging areas, pushed deep into contested territory. These positions provided fire support for patrols and operations while serving as magnets drawing enemy forces into battle, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. Training emphasized speed, firepower, and aggressive pursuit. At bases like Camp Radcliffe and Ankei, soldiers learned to rappel from helicopters, coordinate with artillery forward observers, and call in close air support. The 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, pioneered helicopter assault tactics that became the template for search and destroy operations. Units practiced combat assaults, medical evacuations, and rapid extractions under fire. General Westmoreland personally championed the strategy, convinced that American technological superiority and training would overwhelm North Vietnamese forces. His operational plans called for multi-battalion sweeps through suspected enemy base areas, establishing blocking positions to prevent escape, then systematically destroying enemy forces with artillery and airstrikes. The strategy assumed the enemy would stand and fight when confronted with superior force. Early operations in 1965 and 1966 produced impressive body counts. Operation Starlight in August 1965 claimed 614 enemy killed for 45 American dead. The IA Drying Valley battles in November 1965 resulted in estimated enemy casualties exceeding 2,800, while American losses totaled 305. By Westmoreland's calculations, the war of attrition was proceeding according to plan. But warning signs appeared almost immediately. Enemy forces demonstrated uncanny ability to avoid contact when disadvantageous, choose favorable terrain for ambushes, and break contact before American firepower could be fully brought to bear. North Vietnamese commanders studied American tactics, identified patterns, and developed effective countermeasures. They learned helicopter flight patterns, anticipated sweep routes, and prepared killing zones in advance. Firebase construction became routine by 1966. Engineers would carve hilltop positions from jungle terrain, bulldoze perimeters, install artillery, and establish defensive positions. These firebases pushed American presence into enemy-controlled areas, while providing bases for search and destroy patrols. Ellsberg was established in late 1966 as part of operations in Binh Dinh Province, a heavily contested area along Vietnam's central coast. The position sat on low ground near the Kim Sun River, surrounded by higher terrain, tactically questionable but operationally necessary for supporting wider sweep operations. Soldiers on the ground quickly realized they were being used as bait. The firebases attracted enemy attacks, which commanders viewed as opportunities to inflict casualties in set-piece defensive battles. It was search and destroy in reverse. The Americans became the targets, luring enemy forces into battle where superior firepower could destroy them. At least, that was the theory. At 1 a.m. on December 27, 1966, the theory collided with reality at LZ Bird. The opening salvo of mortars, rockets, and small arms fire erupted with such intensity that Spencer Matteson was blown from his sleep before his mind could process what was happening. In the seconds it took him to reach his bunker, his two teammates were already wounded and bleeding. The deafening roar of incoming fire sounded bizarrely like a monstrous engine revving up, Matteson later recalled. Charlie meant to kill them all. Matteson grabbed his M60 machine gun and fired toward the assault, but after a few bursts it jammed, leaving him with only a .45 pistol and a few clips. The main assault wasn't coming directly at his position, but he could see enemy forces breaching the perimeter. Sergeant Delbert Jennings, positioned to Matteson's right, was taking such heavy fire that he and his men had to pull back. Between the bunkers sat cases of hand grenades that had arrived too late in the day to distribute. Jennings yelled frantically for us to open the grenade boxes, Matteson remembered. They established an improvised assembly line. 3 men unwrapping grenades from cardboard tubes, straightening pins, flipping them to Jennings, who pulled pins and hurled them into the darkness. The steady stream of grenades was devastatingly effective. At first light, they would count a dozen enemy dead in front of that position alone. The firebase numbered 170 men that night. Charlie Company infantry and artillerymen from the 2nd Battalion, 19th Artillery. Against them came 2 battalions of the NVA's 22nd Regiment, reinforced by local Viet Cong, an estimated 1,000 attackers. The odds were nearly 6 to 1. This wasn't a patrol stumbling into an ambush. This was a deliberate, well-planned assault designed to overrun and destroy the firebase. As mortar and rocket fire subsided, small arms fire intensified. Enemy sappers ran alongside riflemen, satchel charges strapped to their backs, attempting to blow up artillery pieces. Some charges detonated, others failed, their fuses dampened by recent rains. Hand-to-hand combat erupted inside the perimeter near the artillery pits. The Americans began pulling back, skirting around the far side of the hill away from the main assault. During the retreat, they passed wounded men trapped in bunkers, screaming for help in the pitch-black darkness. There was nothing we could do for him. Matteson recalled of one soldier lying at the bottom of a bunker, unable to get up. He screamed for help out of the pitch-black darkness, insane with fear and crying out in pain. Stopping would mean death for everyone. They told him they'd be back and kept moving. The survivors consolidated around one remaining 105mm howitzer position, forming a tight perimeter, the only foothold left on the firebase. Everyone not dead, wounded, or playing dead had instinctively retreated to the same spot. They expected to be annihilated at any moment. But they had a plan for this exact scenario. Someone fired a green signal flare, the signal for any Americans still alive out front to get their heads down. Then they leveled the howitzer barrel and fired a beehive round, a canister shell that blasted 8,000 red-hot flechettes of metal in a massive shotgun blast. This was the first combat use of beehive rounds in the Vietnam War. The devastating firepower blunted the assault. The NVA began to retreat. Chinook gunships arrived during the retreat, strafing enemy positions. For every round going from the chopper to the ground, some 1,000 rounds seemed to be going from the ground up, Matteson wrote. It was an awesome and frightful sight. Against all odds, the choppers made it through. Elements from the 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry arrived to reinforce the position. Dawn revealed the terrible cost. Out of 26 men in Matteson's platoon, only 6 emerged unwounded. 15 were dead, 5 wounded. Gary Peasley, who had boasted just the day before that if Charlie didn't get him by Christmas, he'd be home free, took a direct hit from a 57mm rocket. There wasn't much left of him. Joe Willis, a soft-spoken farm boy from central Illinois everyone liked, lay face up in a shallow garbage pit, his M16 cradled in his arms, 6 enemy bodies surrounding him. Lieutenant Jerry Wallace, nicknamed John Wayne for his gung-ho attitude, was found face down in front of his bunker, pearl-handled revolver in hand. He'd run straight into the attack. According to military historian S.L.A. Marshall, who later wrote a book about the battle, L's Bird suffered 58 killed and 71 wounded. The NVA left an estimated 266 dead on the battlefield. By search and destroy metrics, it was an American victory. The enemy had attacked in force, been bloodied severely, and forced to retreat. Body count ratio favored the Americans. But LZ Bird exposed the fundamental flaw in search and destroy doctrine. The firebase had been overrun. The position almost fell completely. American casualties were catastrophic relative to the garrison's size, 76% killed or wounded. The enemy chose the time, place, and method of attack. They inflicted maximum damage, then melted back into the jungle, and within weeks, they'd be back, ranks replenished, ready to do it again. As Marshall noted in his book, Bird the Christmastide Battle, the press reported it as a defeat, barely short of disaster. A solidly defended landing zone had been overrun. The enemy had his way. American losses compared to enemy losses were mournful. Within 24 hours, the battle passed from public consciousness as the press moved on to other stories. But for the men who were there, it never passed. And for Westmoreland's strategy, it revealed a truth commanders didn't want to acknowledge. You can't win a war of attrition when the enemy controls when and where to fight. Both sides learned from battles like LZ Bird, but they drew very different lessons. American forces doubled down on search and destroy while refining tactics. Firebase construction accelerated, with positions pushed even deeper into contested territory. Engineers improved defensive layouts, adding more bunkers, deeper trenches, better fields of fire. Artillery expanded free fire zones around bases where anything moving could be engaged without approval. The strategy remained the same: lure the enemy into decisive battles where superior firepower would prevail. Technology became increasingly central to operations. Sensors planted along infiltration routes detected enemy movement. Defoliants like Agent Orange cleared jungle around fire bases to eliminate cover. B-52 strikes carpet-bombed suspected base areas. The American war machine grew more lethal and more industrialized with each passing month. But North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces adapted more effectively. They studied helicopter flight patterns and timed movements to avoid aerial observation. They built elaborate tunnel systems like those at Cu Chi and the Iron Triangle, creating underground networks that could hide entire battalions. When Americans swept through areas, the enemy simply went underground, waited for the Americans to leave, then re-emerged. Vietnamese commanders developed grab them by the belt tactics, engaging American forces at such close range that air support and artillery couldn't be used without hitting friendly troops. This negated America's primary advantage: standoff firepower. In close combat, the AK-47 and RPG were as effective as the M16 and M60. Most critically, North Vietnamese forces chose when to fight and when to disappear. Intelligence networks warned of American movements hours or days in advance. When conditions favored the Americans, clear weather for air support, open terrain for maneuver, the enemy avoided contact. When conditions favored ambush, dense jungle, bad weather, isolated American units, the enemy attacked with devastating effect. Sergeant Jennings, who received the Medal of Honor for his actions at LZ Bird, embodied the courage of American soldiers executing search and destroy missions. But courage couldn't overcome strategic bankruptcy. Soldiers on the ground grew increasingly frustrated with operations that achieved impressive body counts, but no discernible progress toward victory. The psychological toll mounted on both sides, but manifested differently. American soldiers grew cynical about body count inflation and demoralized by the revolving door of operations. Sweep an area, kill enemy forces, declare success, leave, and have to come back months later to do it all again. Vietnamese fighters endured horrific casualties, but maintained resolve rooted in their view of the conflict as existential. A war for national independence that would continue regardless of losses. By 1967, search and destroy operations had evolved into an industrial killing system. Helicopters inserted forces, artillery plastered suspected positions, infantry swept through, B-52s bombed what was left. And everyone tallied bodies? American forces became extraordinarily proficient at killing. But the enemy kept coming. Operation Cedar Falls in January 1967, and Operation Junction City in February through May 1967. Represented search and destroy at its peak operational capability. Cedar Falls deployed 30,000 American and South Vietnamese troops to clear the Iron Triangle, a notorious enemy stronghold near Saigon. The operation claimed 750 enemy killed, discovered massive tunnel complexes, and destroyed tons of supplies and equipment. Junction City, even larger, involved multi-division sweeps claiming 2,728 enemy dead. The body count numbers kept climbing. Monthly reports documented thousands of enemy casualties. By late 1967, Westmoreland's command projected that enemy forces were being attrited faster than they could be replaced. Mathematical models suggested the crossover point, when enemy losses exceeded replacement capacity, was imminent. Victory appeared quantifiable and approaching. From the Vietnamese perspective, American firepower was indeed brutally effective. NVA and Viet Cong units suffered devastating casualties. Survivors described the horror of B-52 strikes that erased entire grid squares, artillery barrages that churned earth into moonscapes, and helicopter gunships that could pursue fleeing soldiers through open terrain. The American war machine changed the nature of combat into industrialized killing on a scale unprecedented in counterinsurgency warfare. Yet the strategic bankruptcy of search and destroy became undeniable during the Tet Offensive of January-February 1968. Enemy forces launched coordinated attacks across South Vietnam, hitting cities and military installations simultaneously. American forces responded with overwhelming firepower, killing an estimated 45,000 enemy soldiers. By every search and destroy metric, Tet was a decisive American tactical victory. But Tet was a strategic catastrophe for American policy. The attacks shattered the illusion of progress that body counts had created. If enemy forces could mass for offensive operations after years of attrition warfare, what did the casualty numbers mean? Walter Cronkite's famous editorial on February 27, 1968, captured the moment leadership realized search and destroy had failed. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, yet unsatisfactory conclusion. The fundamental error was applying conventional warfare doctrine to revolutionary insurgency. Search and destroy assumed the enemy valued territory, fought to defend positions, and would break under sufficient casualties. North Vietnamese strategy valued none of these things. Territory was expendable. Positions were temporary. Casualties were acceptable costs for political objectives. The war would continue until the Americans left, regardless of body counts. American casualties mounted even as body count ratios remained favorable. The political cost grew unsustainable as domestic opposition intensified. Parents questioned what their sons were dying for when operations produced no lasting gains. Media coverage shifted from supportive to skeptical. The credibility gap between official optimism and battlefield reality became a chasm. By mid-1968, even Westmoreland's replacement, General Creighton Abrams, began shifting away from large-scale search and destroy operations toward pacification and small unit tactics. But the shift came too late. The strategic failure was complete. Search and destroy operations fundamentally influenced Vietnam's outcome by prolonging American involvement in an unwinnable strategy, while failing to achieve decisive results. Nixon's shift to Vietnamization in 1969 represented an implicit admission that attrition warfare had failed. American forces would gradually withdraw while South Vietnamese forces assumed combat responsibilities, essentially declaring that years of search and destroy operations had accomplished nothing that couldn't be handed off to allies we'd been fighting alongside the entire time. Spencer Matteson, who survived LZ Bird, returned to Vietnam in 2014 and visited the battlefield. He encountered a former Viet Cong fighter who had participated in the attack. They shook hands and buried the hatchet. The Vietnamese government erected a monument at the base of the hill claiming 600 American lives. A wildly inflated figure given only 170 Americans were present. Truth is the first casualty of war, Matteson reflected. Governments have their versions of truth, too. They're called lies. Veterans on both sides carried the weight of search and destroy warfare for decades. Sergeant Delbert Jennings, whose Medal of Honor actions saved the firebase at LZ Bird, later served his country with quiet dignity until his death. Matteson noted that survivors struggled with guilt for living when others died, with the meaninglessness of battles that changed nothing strategically, with the fundamental question, how could you win every battle but lose the war? The military lessons influenced future conflicts profoundly. In Iraq and Afghanistan, American commanders initially avoided large-scale search and destroy operations, focusing instead on counterinsurgency doctrine, emphasizing population security and political objectives over body counts. But echoes remained. Fire bases in remote valleys, patrols searching for elusive enemies, the temptation to measure progress through enemy casualties. The fundamental error endures as a cautionary tale. Conventional warfare doctrine cannot defeat revolutionary insurgency without addressing the political grievances that fuel resistance. No amount of firepower can substitute for legitimate governance. You cannot kill your way to victory when the enemy views casualties as acceptable costs for political goals. Search and destroy failed not because American soldiers lacked courage or competence. Men like Jennings and Matteson demonstrated both in abundance, but because the strategy misunderstood the nature of the war it was fighting. That night at LZ Bird, 170 Americans held their ground against 1,000 attackers and inflicted heavy casualties in return. By morning, they still held the hill. By search and destroy logic, they won. But the enemy would be back, and the Americans would eventually leave. In that reality lay the verdict on search and destroy operations. You could win every battle, hold every fire base, and achieve every tactical objective, and still lose the war. Because the enemy wasn't fighting for fire bases or kill ratios. They were fighting for time, and time was the one resource America couldn't match with firepower.